Hello, 8th grade, and welcome to our first online history lecture. Today is going to be a keynote address. In the future, I may, film at school and write things. Sometimes it may just be a picture of my face. But I'm going to try and make keynote addresses as often as possible because I think this will be more helpful to see it. It'll be hopefully a little bit more entertaining, and it'll be clear to see what we're talking about as I'm speaking. Now you can see that all of this material is going to come straight from the book. So in your parent letter, you're getting required reading. You've been getting it all year, but so you're going to be expected to do the reading at home. Then these videos are like supplemental, kind of a way to help explain it since we can't be in class together. So I'm going to try to make history videos on Monday and Wednesday, and science videos on Tuesday and Thursday, and then Friday will be like the days we do tests in the future. Hopefully that won't be too long, because hopefully we'll be back in class talking to each other face to face again soon. This week the reading is on pages 161 to 169. That's only 8 pages, but man, they have packed a lot in. So let's get started. Some of this stuff you'll already know, like we already talked about feudalism and things like that. Other things may be new. Remember, you can always contact me if you have a question. Email me, text me. You can call me or FaceTime me if you need, if there's like something dramatic or you have something time sensitive. But also the information will be posted online. I also posted a video on how to use Dropbox to send assignments, since that's how we're going to do it. All right, well, let's get into the lecture. Get going. Intro to Chapter 15, The English Nation. So in Chapter 14, we talked about the Protestant Reformation, and we kind of took a look around mainland Europe, the different countries, France and Spain and Switzerland. Chapter 15 is all devoted to England. Because we live in America, we have a strong connection or link to England, and so we're going to spend all of Chapter 15 just talking about the history. It's almost 2,000 years long, so that's a lot of information. Now, it's pages 161 to 169 are going to be covered in the lectures. When I say United Kingdom, we're actually talking about 4 different countries that you can see right here. Now, the Republic of Ireland is its own independent area, and we will talk about the wars between England and Ireland throughout the chapter. England will also be at war with Scotland and Wales and just about everybody else, but that's how things were. So when we're talking about United Kingdom, we're talking about all of those places. If we're talking about Great Britain, we're talking about Scotland, England, and Wales. If we're just talking about England, which is what we're going to be doing mostly, we're just talking about that yellow section. So England is about the size of California. So you can think of like kind of California as being the whole country, is being England, and then later maybe not even that big. But so when we're talking about England, we're not talking about Wales or Scotland or Ireland or any of the rest of them. We'll get to them later. All right. So the earliest history, prehistory to 500 AD. When we talk about prehistory, that is before they started writing things down. Remember, history is the study of the past using the written word. So if you're talking about like what the cavemen did, the Crudes or whatever, well, they didn't write anything down, so we don't really have, that's kind of prehistory. That's archaeology. That's not history. The earliest records that we have are of people called the Celts and the Britons. Now, remember, there were people in England before then. If you remember the famous Stonehenge, that big stone circle with with big rocks piled up on each other. We don't know who built that. That is way before our time. The earliest known written accounts of England that we have come from that guy, Julius Caesar. Now, before him, the Celts and the Britons were a culture who worshipped nature. Druids were the priestly class. Today, Druids in like modern culture are like guys in white robes. We don't know a whole lot about who the Druids were because when the Romans conquered, they killed all the Druids. But the Druids were the priest class, and all of the Celtic temples were outdoors. So we know they worshipped nature because they didn't build churches or temples inside. Normally, when we think of places that people worship gods, they build a house for the god and then they go in and worship it. But the Druids did not do that. And the Druids kind of got bad press because they didn't write anything down. The Romans wrote everything down about them, and obviously they were fighting a war, so they're not gonna, write nice things about them. They wrote, that they were cannibals and, sacrificed humans. Now, it's possible that they did that, but it may also be possible that, that the Romans were just throwing shade. I mean, imagine if a person who didn't like you at all wrote your biography. It's not going to be very nice. Julius Caesar is the first Roman to invade. He invades in 55 BC. It's not BB, it's just typo. 55 BC, 55 years before Jesus was born. And he fights a battle with the Britons, wins, but then leaves quickly because he doesn't think he can win the war. The Romans come back 70 years later under Emperor Claudius, and Claudius sends the Roman legions who do conquer and occupy the island of Britain, which will become known as England, and they name him, like if you were a Roman general who conquered something, they would name you after it as kind of like an honorific title. And so they call him Claudius Britannicus because he conquered Britain. And then for 500 years, Britain or England is Roman. The people start wearing togas. They start going to the forum. They start doing all of the things we talked about in the Roman times. Start taking baths in the hot jacuzzi time. And they become Christianized later. But when Western Rome falls, it all goes south quickly. The fall of Western Rome. Britain was invaded by Germanic tribes. You remember from previous chapters, we talked about the Visigoths and the Vandals. Well, up north, they were invaded by the Germanic tribes of the Jutes, the Saxons, and the Angles. And it's the Angles that give us our word English or England because people called it the land of the Angles or Angleland. And our earliest written English poem or book was written in Old English or Anglish, and it is like a warrior poem. So back in the day, they didn't have, they couldn't watch YouTube, they couldn't play video games or, do any of that. So if you're going to have a party, you would often bring over what were called scops, and they were like wandering poets. And these were not poets like roses are red, violets are blue. They would tell epic poems of like the warrior's deeds and battles. Behold, so and so smote his enemy and wreaked the havoc and burned the such and such. Those were the stories they wanted to hear. And Beowulf is the first book in Old English, and it was written about this person named Beowulf. He was almost certainly made up, who did all kinds of crazy things. He killed dragons and slaughtered trolls and everything. But he is like the model Anglo-Saxon, like tough dude. He's not a rom-com. He's not in touch with his emotions. He is, my sword shall smite these, like the Doom guy or whatever. We're going to try and listen to a short clip of how English used to sound, over 1,000 years ago. They did not say things like, the party was lit. Let's see if we can do this, work it out. No, that didn't work. I'll try and I'll send that link, and if you want to hear it, um, we'll try and play it in the end. I think I showed it to you in class earlier. It's very, very difficult to understand. Almost none of the words would be, you'd be able to comprehend them in today's English. But if you want to listen to a translation of Beowulf and write like a short essay for extra credit, let me know. Email me or text me. I want to offer extra credit during our time apart, because I know grades are going to be difficult. I want to try and keep you interested, and I want to find other avenues for you to raise, improve, or maintain your grade. So if you want, they made a movie on it, although it's probably not PG. But if you want, they have translations and audiobooks. If you want to listen to a little bit of it or research it and write an essay, let me know. Okay, so England during the Middle Ages was not the England that we think of today. When Western Rome falls and the Germanic tribes invade, everything that was Rome is kind of lost. So Roman Catholicism, Christianity is gone. Roman building and architecture is gone. And you have the beginning of Anglo-Saxon culture. And Anglo-Saxon culture is a warrior culture. Their main god, Woden, and Thor, a lot of these guys that we think of as Norse gods, were also Anglo-Saxon, the all-father gods of lightning and thunder and fury and combat. But the Christian church sent somebody named St. Augustine to try to preach the gospel to the Anglo-Saxons. And funny enough, it worked. These tough dudes managed to hear the gospel for whatever reason. Maybe it was a miracle. Maybe they just wanted, some of that Roman money. Who knows? But St. Augustine is able to spread the gospel in England. And so England starts to revert back to Christianity around 600 AD. Unfortunately for them, around this same time, Vikings start invading England. Now, we talked about Vikings in class. Vikings are people who were like pirates. They were pirates who came from Norse countries, Norse. Norse countries were like Norway, Sweden, Denmark. And a Viking was like a raider, somebody who would pillage and burn the towns and steal all the gold. And so these group of Vikings were called Danes because they came from Denmark primarily, and they started to pillage the land. And they invaded all over Europe, but since Denmark is right next to England, England got hit particularly hard. And these Danes started invading and pillaging the towns, and nobody knew what to do. They could just show up out of nowhere in their Viking longboats and, kill all the men and kidnap all the women and children, take all the gold and pots and pans, anything that wasn't nailed down. And they were a real scourge. Eventually they thought, hey, why are we stealing and leaving? Let's just stay and keep the land too. And so the Danes started to conquer England. And England used to be made up into about 5 kingdoms called the Heptarchy, and you don't need to know them, but it's like Wessex and Sussex and Mercia, and these 5 smaller kingdoms, and they fell to the Danes one by one until there was only one kingdom left, the kingdom of Wessex. And the kingdom of Wessex was lucky because they had a guy named Alfred who was the king at the time, and he was smart and he was brave, and he's the only English king named the Great. There are other English kings with numbers after their name or the Confessor, but there are no the Greats. In fact, there are very few the Greats kings at all in all of history. You have, the Bald or the Fat or the Boneless, but very few the Greats. And Alfred was called the Great because he saves England. England was on the verge of being conquered and annihilated by the Viking horde, but he set up a system of forts and armies that not only defended Wessex, but then he went on the offense and began to take back land from the Danes. And so Alfred is known as Alfred the Great. Boom. Next slide. Beginnings of English rule. So when Alfred was king, he was not king of England, he was king of Wessex. But as his descendants and later other people who conquer, they conquer more territories until you get Canute the Dane, who conquers all of England. So Canute is actually a Dane. So, the Danes eventually do conquer England in the form of Canute, and here is a picture of him. Now, he's the only Danish king, but he does conquer and rule England for a short time, and he passes along his genetic code. The current Queen Elizabeth II of England can trace her lineage all the way back to Canute. Canute conquered all of England for the first time, as you can see, but he was also king of Denmark and Norway and England and ruled this great empire. So one of the reasons that people admire him or respect him is before, even under Alfred the Great, England was split into these different smaller kingdoms, and he managed to unify it for the first time. And that was a big deal. And ever since, following Canute, you will have England as a whole. Before Canute, England is ruled by Celts, or it's ruled by the Romans in different parts, or it's ruled in smaller fractions like Wessex. But following Canute, there is a country called England, and it has one king over the land, and so he is credited with unifying all of England. Way to go, Canute. Awesome job. When he dies, his successor is a guy named Harold Godwin, and Harold Godwin's son is a guy named Harold Godwin's son. Not very creative. But Harold Godwinson has some bad luck because he is king at the same time as there's a guy named William, Duke of Normandy, who's just across the ocean. And William, Duke of Normandy, is called a couple names. One of them is not very nice. They called him William the Bastard because he was born out of wedlock. His father was the Duke of Normandy, and his father had a wife, but as kings do, William's father kind of had girlfriends on the side, and William was the son of one of the girlfriends. Now, normally, that would mean you cannot be the king. But William is kind of so charismatic and strong and energetic that he manages to become his father's favorite and rule after him. Now, anybody who called him William the Bastard, I'm sure, did not do it to his face because that would cause problems. Everybody else called him William the Conqueror because he conquered a bunch of stuff. Now, this is a famous, it's actually a tapestry that is like a woven cloth. It's called the Bayeux Tapestry. And some nuns in the town of Bayeux wove it for William following his conquest of England. Now, William, Duke of Normandy, wants to expand his kingdom. Normandy is actually a territory in northern France. We'll talk about that later. But William is related to Canute. They're both Norseman descendants. And he believes that he should be the next king of England. Harold Godwinson, the current king of England, says he should be the king of England. And so William invades England. And Harold Godwinson had fought a number of battles, but when he reaches William, Duke of Normandy, he gets into some trouble. And they meet in the south of England at a place called Hastings in 1066. Now, the Anglo-Saxons fought on foot, so we call them infantry, and they would all line up in a big line, and they would lock their shields together, and they would fight in these shield walls. That's what they were called. The Normans rode on heavy cavalry, and if you look at those pictures, you can see they got armor on, and they have these big shields that look kind of like kites, and they would ride up and throw their spears. Now, the Battle of Hastings is a long battle. They fight all day, and as the sun's going down, nobody has really managed to get the upper hand. But William, Duke of Normandy, leads one last charge, and in that last charge, he gets lucky. An archer's arrow flies over the shield wall and hits Harold in the eye, killing him instantly. And soon as he dies, the rest of the shield wall kind of falls apart. And so William is able to take his cavalry and kind of trample over the rest of the survivors. And when he defeats Harold, he wipes out most of the Anglo-Saxon forces. And Harold Godwinson is the last Anglo-Saxon king of England. And in winning the Battle of Hastings, William becomes the King of England. Now, what do you do when you conquer the territory? Well, you give it to your buddies. You probably remember when we talked about feudalism. Feudalism is the system of government where you give land in exchange for military service. So you might remember when I drew up on the board, Daniela conquers all of the kingdom, and she gives some of the land to Bailey and some of the land to Malcolm, right? And then they swear to fight for Daniela. Well, that's what happens in England. When William conquers it, all of the land belongs to him. And he gives out sections of that land to his close followers. And they get that land, which means lots and lots of money, and in exchange they agree to fight for William whenever he calls them. And that is feudalism. Now, when you're giving away land, you're basically giving away money. And the way governments get money is from taxes. So William needs to know how much to tax people. Now, not everybody gets taxed the same, because rich people can afford to pay more taxes than poor people. So, the way you figure out who gets taxed is you have a census. In fact, we're having a census right now in America where we're counting all of the people. And so William the Conqueror creates this census, and he counts every man, woman, and child in all of England. He sends out all of his tax collectors. And not only do they count every person, they count every head of cattle, every sheep, every dog, every pig. It is so thorough that it's called the Domesday Book. Now, it's spelled Domesday, but remember that was in Old English. It's pronounced Doomsday Book, and it was kind of that nickname because they thought, at the end of the ages, God won't have counted any better than William the Conqueror counted in his Doomsday Book. So it's kind of like a lame Old English joke. Now, before William the Conqueror, the Anglo-Saxon kings had kind of an assembly of nobles called the Witan. You can see it Witan. And anytime they were going to go to war, they would call the Witan together and get all of the Anglo-Saxons, their nobles, to agree, okay, we're going to go fight Wessex, we're going to go fight Mercia, we're going to fight the Normans. Obviously, William the Conqueror doesn't want that anymore, so he creates a new assembly called the Great Council. And in this new assembly, he appoints it with all of his homies. So all of the knights that followed him become extremely rich. They become extremely wealthy. They get land, they get titles. And in the Middle Ages, the aristocracy, the knights and nobles of England, will all be French from the Norman conquest. So the French kings, the English kings that we're talking about in the future, will all be French. And that's important to remember because on Wednesday, we're going to start talking about the Plantagenet kings and the Hundred Years' War between England and France. And the Hundred Years' War is an argument between the English kings and the French kings about who should be king of what. And since they're both technically French and they're both related, it's almost like a civil war as the English kings who speak French and who have French names fight the French kings for control of France. There would be no Hundred Years' War if it wasn't for the Norman conquest. William the Conqueror becomes insanely powerful, insanely rich, and he rules the country, and he creates this new attitude in England during the Middle Ages. He's so powerful, he can even appoint church members, what we call clergy, and he appoints the Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest church office in Middle Ages Christianity, and he tells who should be the Archbishop, not the Pope, which just lets you know just how powerful he was. Now, when he dies, his sons kind of make a mess of things, and we'll talk about that, but his descendants will create a new dynasty called the Plantagenets. And the Plantagenets will get into all kinds of drama and interesting battles and stories and love interests, and we're going to talk about them Wednesday. So that's it for now. Continue reading in your book. Remember, if you have any questions, text me, email me, call me. If you have an idea for extra credit from Beowulf or maybe something else you see in these keynote addresses, let me know, because it's going to be difficult just listening and watching these videos to get interested. So anything that you can show me where you're taking action, you're doing your own thing to add to our online digital world here, I definitely want to help you do that. So please contact me. I hope you guys are doing well. I can't wait until we're back in class. I'm praying for you guys, and I'll see you soon. All right, have a good day. Bye-bye.